All right, let's jump into some really fascinating stuff today.
Oh,
So you've given us, well, a pretty hefty reading list this time. The entire Ringing Cedars of Russia series, all 10 books, plus The Law of One. I mean, we're talking about ancient wisdom, mystical abilities, and some pretty out there ideas about how we live and how we could build a society.
yeah, it's a pretty unique combo.
It is. It
And
is.
that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, right? Because we're not just going to like summarize these texts, but we're going to look for the connections, the themes that run through them,
Mm.
and then like, what does it all mean for, for you listening?
I love that. I love that. So, okay, let's start with The Ringing Cedars.
Mm.
Have you ever read a book series and you're like, is this fiction? Is this reality?
Oh, yeah, all the time, especially when you get into spiritual and esoteric teachings, right?
Right.
But the Ringing Cedars series, it really kind of takes it to another level. The way it's written, it's presented as this first-person narrative by this guy, Vladimir Migra,
Yeah.
and he claims to have met Anastasia, this woman living in the Siberian taiga, and he's like documenting her teachings.
Right, right. It's like he's saying, this is what I experienced, but he's also leaving it open for you to decide how much you want to take it literally.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
So for those who haven't, like, ventured into the Siberian wilderness with these books yet, like, who is this Anastasia?
She's a bit of an enigma, right? She's like this wise woman living in harmony with nature, kind of like a modern day Thoreau, but with a mystical twist. She claims to have this ancient knowledge. She can communicate with plants and animals, and she even has this ability to like influence events from afar.
Wait, hold on. Influence events from afar. You mean like telekinesis or something?
Well, not exactly. She describes it as having a ray of influence, a kind of energy she can project to heal, to inspire, and even impact things that are happening really far away.
Okay, so that's where my skeptical side starts to come in. Is there anything in the Law of One that connects to this idea of Anastasia's ray?
Yeah, there is. The Law of One talks about consciousness as a non-local phenomenon, meaning it's not like stuck in time and space as we normally think about it.
Uh,
So if consciousness isn't limited by distance, then maybe this ray could be seen as like focused intention or thought projection, which the Law of One talks about a lot.
So instead of thinking of it as some supernatural power, we could see it as like tapping into a deeper level of consciousness, this interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And this actually ties into one of the big themes that runs through both the Ringing Cedars and the Law of One, this idea of the power of thought. Anastasia's always talking about how our thoughts create our reality, and the Law of One takes this concept even further, right? With the law of attraction, like on an energetic level.
Yeah, it's like what you focus on expands both inside yourself and in the world around you.
Right. And Anastasia actually gives us this really specific example of how this works with her instructions for creating cedar nut oil. It's not just a recipe, it's about the energy, the intention you put into the process. Like she believes that if you have pure, loving thoughts when you're planting, taking care of, and harvesting the cedar nuts, it actually makes the oil more healing.
Okay, so I'm curious. I mean, I've heard of the health benefits of cedar nut oil, but is there any science, like any actual evidence to support Anastasia's claim that thoughts can make it, like, more effective?
That's where it gets tricky, right? Anastasia's teachings, they often come from this ancient wisdom and personal experience, which can be hard to prove scientifically.
Okay.
But there is more and more research coming out in fields like epigenetics and psychoneuroimmunology that shows that our thoughts, our emotions can actually affect our physical health and well-being.
So maybe there is something to this idea that our intentions, they can kind of create a blueprint, even on something like cedar nut oil. It makes me wonder, like, how much do I even consider the energy behind the stuff I consume?
Right. And that's one of the things I really like about these sources. They encourage us to think outside the box,
Hmm.
Consider things that might challenge how we understand the world right now.
Totally. Okay, so we've got this mysterious Anastasia. She's sharing this wisdom about the power of thought, living in tune with nature, the importance of intention. But she also talks about creating a specific way of living, the kin domain. What is that all about?
So think of it as a self-sufficient homestead, designed to reconnect humans with nature and themselves.
Right.
She describes it as at least 1 hectare of land, so that's about 2.5 acres, where families can grow their own food, build homes with natural materials, and basically live in harmony with the earth.
So it's kind of like a back to the land movement, but with a spiritual dimension to it.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where you can reconnect with the natural rhythms of life, live more sustainably, and develop a deeper connection to your intuition and your inner wisdom. And she doesn't just throw out the idea, she gives you specific ways to design this kin domain, including a space of love in the home.
Space of love. What's that? Like a meditation room or something?
It's more than a room, it's a concept. Anastasia believes that the design and energy of your home, they should be intentionally created to nurture love, harmony, positive energy. It's about aligning your living space with your inner state.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've noticed a lot of people are into eco-villages and intentional communities these days. Do you see a connection there between those movements and this kin domain idea?
Absolutely. Anastasia's vision, it's really resonated with people who are looking for alternative ways of living. They want to get away from the craziness of modern life and create more sustainable, community-oriented ways of being. And actually, there are kin domain settlements popping up around the world based on her teachings.
Wow, so people are really putting this into practice. It's one thing to read about it, but to see people actually building these kin domains, that's pretty cool. What are your thoughts? Do you see this as like a real alternative to how we live now?
That's a big question, right?
It is.
I think there are definitely aspects of the kin domain concept that are worth exploring, especially when it comes to sustainability, self-sufficiency, reconnecting with nature. But there are also challenges.
Yeah, I mean, how do you balance the need for community and collaboration with this desire to be self-sufficient, right?
Yeah.
And what about like access to resources, technology? Not everyone can just pick up and create kin domain in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you've hit on some key points. Anastasia's vision, it requires a pretty big shift in our thinking and in how society works. It raises questions about land ownership, how we distribute resources, how we create a system that supports this kind of decentralized way of living. It's not an easy solution, but it does make you think about the possibilities.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so interesting. It's not about just saying yes or no to these ideas. It's about exploring them,
Yeah,
questioning them, and figuring out what feels right to you.
exactly.
So what are your first reactions to Anastasia's teachings? What stands out to you?
Oh man, so much. It's a lot to take in. I mean, the kin domain idea is really intriguing, but I'm also fascinated by this ray concept and how it ties into consciousness. Like in the law of one, it's like it opens up this whole other way of understanding the world and our place in it.
I agree. I agree. And we're just scratching the surface. Anastasia also goes into alternative interpretations of history, particularly with this idea of Vedic Rus. Have you ever felt like the history we learn, it's like missing something?
All the time.
Yeah.
There are so many mysteries, unanswered questions, especially when you start digging deeper than the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. So what's Anastasia's take on all this?
She says that what we've been taught about history, it's incomplete, maybe even intentionally hidden. She talks about this ancient civilization called Vedic Rus, a society that existed way before our current understanding of history, and they had advanced spiritual knowledge and technology that's been lost or forgotten.
Hold on. Lost technology. Is she talking about like flying chariots or something?
Well, she doesn't get into the specifics about their technology,
Okay.
but she does point to these ancient stone structures, these dolmens, as evidence that they were pretty advanced. She claims that these dolmens were used for spiritual purposes that we've totally lost touch with.
Okay, now that is interesting. I've seen pictures of dolmens, these massive stone structures. They're all over the world. There are so many theories about what they were for. What does Anastasia say about how they were used?
She suggests they were used for healing, communication, even influencing the energy of the planet. It's all connected to this idea that humans at one point had a much deeper understanding of how everything's connected and this power of thought.
So she's basically saying we've like devolved,
Yeah.
that we've lost touch with our true potential.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
She believes modern society is too focused on material things and has forgotten about our spiritual nature and our connection to nature. But she also offers hope,
Right.
that we can rediscover this ancient wisdom and create a better future.
Yeah, that's a message that resonates with a lot of people, especially those who are drawn to spiritual teachings and alternative ways of living. This kind of longing for something more, a sense that there's more to discover, a deeper truth. But before we go too deep into that, let's maybe unpack the law of one a bit more.
Yeah.
For those who aren't familiar with this text, how does it connect to what we've been talking about with Anastasia and her teachings?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
The Law of One is this incredibly complex and esoteric text. It's said to be channeled from a higher dimensional being named Ra. And it goes into all sorts of mind-bending topics like the nature of reality, how consciousness evolves, these cosmic laws that govern our existence.
Okay, I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed, just like we're
Yes.
going from the Siberian taiga to, like, the depths of the cosmos.
I hear you. It can be a lot to process.
Yeah.
But stick with us because there are some surprising connections between these seemingly different sources. Like, for example, Anastasia's focus on the power of thought, it lines up perfectly with the law of one's teachings on the law of attraction and the idea that our thoughts create our reality.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this kin domain concept, how does that fit into this cosmic picture? It seems pretty grounded compared to all this talk of higher dimensions and universal laws.
That's a great question. What if we think of the kin domain not just as a physical space, but as a way of like aligning ourselves with a certain frequency or vibration? The Law of One talks about different levels of consciousness or densities, and it suggests that we're currently in a transition moving from third density, which is very focused on material reality, to fourth density, which is characterized by greater love, compassion, and understanding.
So are you saying that creating a kin domain could be a way of raising our vibration and preparing for this shift to fourth density?
That's one way to look at it. It's about creating a lifestyle and an environment that supports our spiritual growth and
Yeah.
aligns us with that frequency of love and harmony.
This is where it gets really interesting. We're starting to see how these ideas connect between Anastasia's very practical teachings on how to live and the law of one's exploration of consciousness and the universe.
It's like they're offering two sides of the same coin, one focused on the down-to-earth application and the other on the cosmic context.
Right.
And that's what I love about this deep dive. We get to explore both.
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away, let's pause and bring it back to you listening. What's grabbing your attention so far? What's resonating with your own beliefs and experiences?
What questions are popping up, Sunil?
Yeah.
Are there parts of these teachings that you find challenging or intriguing?
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. You know, it's fascinating how both the Ringing Cedars and the Law of One, even though they come from totally different places, they kind of point us towards a similar goal, recognizing that we are spiritual beings and that we're all connected.
That's so true. It's like Anastasia gives us this practical guide for how to live in harmony
Yeah.
with nature, with ourselves. And then the law of one is like this cosmic backdrop, helping us understand where we fit in the universe.
Exactly. And that brings up a question, right? Like, could living in a kin domain actually help us reach this higher level of consciousness that the Law of One talks about? Could it be a step towards fourth density?
Okay, now that is a thought-provoking question. But let's break it down a little,
Yeah.
because the law of one uses this concept of densities, which can be confusing.
Mhm.
How would you explain densities to someone who's new to this?
Think of densities as levels of consciousness, kind of. Each one has its own challenges and opportunities to grow. We're in third density right now, which is very focused on material stuff, individuality, and learning through opposites, good versus bad, light versus dark, that kind of thing.
So like we're in this cosmic school, learning through contrast, making choices that shape how we evolve, both individually and together.
Exactly. And fourth density, it's described as this more harmonious state of being where love, compassion, and understanding are like the main driving forces. It's not about leaving Earth or getting superpowers. It's about evolving our consciousness and moving beyond the limitations of separation and duality.
Okay, so maybe creating a kin domain could be seen as a way of practicing fourth density principles, but in a third density world. It's about living in a way that aligns us with those higher frequencies, those vibrations of love and harmony.
Yeah, that's a really insightful way to put it. It's like creating this mini version of a more evolved society where we can try out new ways of relating to each other and to the planet.
I love that idea, like planting a seed for a new way of being, even if the world around us hasn't caught up yet.
Right. And that brings us back to Anastasia's emphasis on the power of thought. If we believe that our thoughts create our reality, then creating these kin domains, even if they're small, it could be a way of sending out a powerful message into the collective consciousness.
Like planting a seed in the energetic field of the planet, nurturing the possibility of a more harmonious future.
Exactly. And that connects to another point where these sources come together. Both Anastasia and the Law of One talk about this idea of a harvest, this transition to a higher level of consciousness happening on a global scale.
Yeah, Anastasia talks about a time when humans will kind of wake up to their true potential, create a world full of kin domains, living in harmony with nature. It sounds almost utopian.
Right, and the Law of One describes it as the shift from third density to fourth density, and that it's a process that's already happening.
But doesn't the law of one also suggest that not everyone will make it through this transition? That there might be a splitting of timelines or realities based on our choices and where our vibrations are at?
That's true. It suggests that we have a choice to make.
Yeah.
Keep clinging to the illusions of separation, the duality, or embrace this path of love, unity, and service to others. And those choices determine what reality we experience.
So it's not just about waiting for this harvest to happen. It's about actually making choices that put us on the frequency of love and contribute to the positive evolution of consciousness.
Absolutely. And both Anastasia and the Law of One emphasize that we have way more power in this process than we realize. Our thoughts, our actions, our intentions, they all shape the future.
It's empowering to think that we're not just watching this happen, we're a part of it.
Definitely. And it brings up another point. Both sources talk about facing resistance from forces that want to keep things as they are, prevent this awakening from happening.
Oh, right. Anastasia talks about the priests who have manipulated history, kept knowledge hidden, and the Law of One talks about the Orion Confederation, these beings that are supposedly service to self-oriented, wanting to control and limit spiritual growth.
It's a common theme in a lot of spiritual teachings, the idea that there are forces that benefit from keeping humanity asleep, trapped in these cycles of fear, scarcity, and division. But both Anastasia and the Law of One emphasize that these forces can only control us if we let them.
So it's about taking back our power, becoming aware of how we've been manipulated, and choosing to align with love and light instead.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of discernment. When we're learning about these teachings, it's so important to listen to our intuition, question everything, and make choices that resonate with our deepest truth.
Like we're being called to become conscious creators, to step into our power and choose the reality we want to experience.
Right, and that takes courage, a willingness to challenge the way things are, to question what we've been told, and to trust our own inner voice.
But let's be real, it's not always easy to stay that aware, that intentional, especially in a world full of distractions and messages pulling us in different directions.
You're right, it's a constant practice, remembering, coming back to center, choosing love over fear, over and over again.
So how can we actually bring these teachings into our daily lives? It's easy to get lost in the big picture, but how do we ground it and make it real?
Anastasia gives us some concrete ideas with this kin domain concept. Even if we can't all create a full kin domain right now, there are parts we can try. Like, how can we bring more nature into our homes? Be mindful of the food we eat, where it comes from, create spaces in our homes that feel peaceful and harmonious.
Those are great starting points.
Yeah.
And what about all this stuff about the power of thought? How do we become more conscious creators?
Practices like meditation, mindfulness, affirmations, those can help. It's about becoming more aware of our thoughts, the stories we tell ourselves, and making a choice to focus on thoughts that empower us, lift us up, and put us on a higher vibration.
And it's not just about thinking positive thoughts, it's about making our thoughts match our values, what we want to see in the world.
Exactly. And both Anastasia and the Law of One are clear that love is the strongest force in the universe. So how can we bring more love into our thoughts, our words, what we do? How can we show more compassion to ourselves, to other people, even when things are hard?
Such important questions.
Yeah.
It's like we're being asked to change our whole way of being, to go from a place of fear to a place of love.
Yeah, and it's not about being perfect. It's about trying, messing up, and then learning and growing from it. It's a journey, It's not a destination.
Beautifully said. So, for you listening, what are you taking away from all this? What's got you curious? What feels like a call to action for you?
What if we just sit with those questions for a moment, let them sink in?
Wow, what a journey this has been. Exploring Anastasia's teachings and the Ringing Cedars and the wisdom of the Law of One. It's amazing how these two sources, from such different backgrounds, create this tapestry of ancient wisdom, the power of thought, and this vision of a future that's more conscious and harmonious.
Yeah, it shows how these universal truths, they can be expressed in so many different ways, right? And each one can resonate with us in a unique way.
Exactly. And it's inspiring to see how many people are taking these teachings to heart,
Yeah.
creating kin domains, trying out different ways of living, and really trying to live those principles of love, unity, and connection.
It really shows the power of ideas to change not just people, but whole communities and maybe even the world, right?
Speaking of changing the world, I want to come back to this idea of a harvest, this shift to a higher consciousness that both sources talk about.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's actually happening?
It's a powerful idea, and whether we call it a harvest, a shift, or an awakening, there's this feeling that something big is happening on a global scale.
Right.
We see it in the growing interest in spirituality, sustainability, and alternative ways of living. We see it in the movements for social justice, environmental activism, and a more compassionate, interconnected world.
It's like a collective yearning for something more, a feeling that the old ways aren't working anymore.
Exactly. And both Anastasia and the Law of One say that we're not just watching this happen, we're a part of it. Our choices matter, our thoughts, our intentions, what we do, they all shape the direction of this transition.
That's a lot of responsibility, but it's also empowering. It means we can co-create the future we want.
Exactly. And it's not about waiting for something outside of ourselves to fix everything. It's about doing the work on ourselves, changing ourselves, and letting that change radiate outwards.
Okay, so let's talk about that inner work. What are some practical steps we can take to align with this higher frequency and contribute to a positive shift?
Well, Anastasia's kin domain concept, it's like a blueprint for living in harmony. Even if we can't all have a full kin domain right now, we can take parts of it.
Right.
Spending more time in nature, thinking about what we consume, maybe growing some of our own food, creating spaces in our homes that feel good. Those are all steps we can take.
And what about the teachings on the power of thought?
Right.
How do we become more conscious about creating our reality?
Things like meditation, mindfulness, affirmations, those are helpful. It's about noticing our thoughts, the stories we're telling ourselves, and choosing to focus on thoughts that lift us up, empower us, and align us with our best selves.
It's like we're training our minds to be instruments of love, compassion, and creativity.
Yes. And it's not just about positive thinking, it's about knowing deep down that we're connected to something bigger than ourselves, that we're part of this incredible cosmic unfolding.
It's about remembering who we really are, spiritual beings having this human experience.
Beautifully said. And when we remember that, we start making choices that reflect our true nature. We become more compassionate, forgiving, more willing to give love and kindness to ourselves and others.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one last invitation. What if, instead of waiting for the world to change, we became the change? What if we lived as if the future we want is already here?
Imagine a world full of kin domains, people living in harmony with nature, communities thriving on cooperation and love, where our thoughts and actions create ripples of healing that spread across the planet.
What small step can you take today to make that vision real, to bring it to life in your own way? Maybe it's planting a seed, doing 5 minutes of meditation, saying thank you to someone you love, or just smiling at a stranger. Every act of love, no matter how small, it helps wake up consciousness and create a better world.
Thank you for joining us.
Keep searching, keep asking questions, and keep shining your light. We create the future.